Hello party people and welcome to the Seltjarnarnes Peninsula. Probably not quite saying it right, just Seltjarnarnes. It's all just one word. Peninsula out in Reykjavik. I had wanted to film here a couple of times before, but you can only get out here to the lighthouse and to the lighthouse keeper's house. There's this little island that houses this stuff. You can only get out here at low tide. It's a really beautiful area, but then up at high tide, the water covers the little peninsula and you can't walk out here. There's even, you can even see on a clear day, you can see that volcano that's blowing out from Iceland right now over on that side of the horizon there. So it's just a really neat isolated place to be out here and hang out with the birds. It's a bird sanctuary too. It's closed to the public during the summer up until like June or July, I forget which one. Humans aren't allowed to walk around out here. So let's see what questions y'all had. Top rated question was from Geo. Geo says, are there any known gotchas from using Windows Update to apply cumulative updates to SQL Server? It says, I use it to update Windows and SQL Server at the same time for my development and logship servers, and so far it's been smooth sailing, but I can't convince myself it's a great idea for the primary. Normally when people ask that, they're talking about automating it, like having Windows Update automatically apply things at certain times of the day or night. I'm not a fan of that because you can have a long-running transaction or a backup get interrupted by Windows Update. I've seen so many cases where people set up their Windows Update to run every night and then didn't realize that it was restarting at the same time backups were running. So it's not like you get an automatic retry with SQL Server backups. If your backup fails, you just don't get another full backup until the time for the next full backup. Same thing with things like data warehouse loads, long-running jobs. So when it comes to updating production servers, I would just really prefer that there's a human being looking to check on that it's okay to do the SQL Server, as opposed to just having it fire and forget automatically in the background and missing things like backups. Next up, AlwaysLearningDBA says, hello Brent, a friend of mine wanted to know what camera system you're using when you're doing outdoor office Q&A sessions. He's curious as the camera follows your movement, and he says, kind of moved around a little. The camera follows your movement as if the camera is, someone's moving the camera physically, and he thinks it's awesome. It's called a DJI Pocket 2. I just bought this in the last month. DJI Pocket 2. It's a little handheld camera with a gimbal on it, so that not only does it track my face and move around, but it will also stabilize so that I don't have to worry as much about getting the tripod exactly level, which is nice when I'm on places like beaches and islands. The one downside of it is that the face tracking isn't very tunable. You get fast and slow, but that's all you get. And this is even the slow option. And I know some of y'all have complained that you get a little motion sick when I move around a lot, because of course I'm very animated. So I've been trying to move around a little less, because otherwise it just, bops around all the time when I'm talking. I wish if it was more tunable, I would slow it down a lot. But next up, PGA says, hi Brent, if I have first name and last name in one index, and then city and age on another index, and my query uses an order by with a column from one index and also a column from the other, will both indexes be used? They might be used for filtering with a where clause, but they're not going to be used for filtering in an order by. Also, this tells me a couple of things. One, you haven't watched my How to Think Like the Engine class. It's totally free. Go take a moment to go Google for that. Brenno's are How to Think Like the Engine. And it's available totally for free in both written format and in YouTube format, so whichever one you prefer. And I go into the mechanics of how that question works. Second thing it tells me is you're lazy. Because you put all this stuff together, you really could have just scripted it out and tested it instead of waiting for someone to answer you on YouTube. Go do a frickin' experiment when you have questions like that. People, don't wait for someone to teach you, just go try it. You can see it in a matter of seconds. Inpasta DBA says, hi Brent, do execution plans replicate over to the secondary in an availability group? I'm wondering if during a failover occurred, planned or unplanned, Will the plans be the same? No, execution plans do not copy from the primary to the secondary unless you're using query store or any method of forcing query execution plans. If you use a method to force query execution plans, then that can carry over to the secondary. But otherwise, you can imagine why it would just be so speed intensive to copy every execution plan over to a secondary every single time an execution plan was compiled. Yeah, so that's the end of that one. Yeah, this also means that if you have readable secondaries, you can run into parameter sniffing issues where different secondaries have different execution plans because they were sniffed for different parameters, because the first parameter that you ran is different on each of the secondaries. Jack says, hi Brent, with all of the certifications available now for Azure, Amazon, and Google, has your opinion on the value of certifications changed? No. They can't all be long answers. I'm a potato, who even uses an emoji, that's good. I'm a potato says, hi Brent, is there a way to know the health of your statistics on SQL Server and prevent their most common issues? Yes, if you look, because you're probably on YouTube. On YouTube, go on to the Brent Unlimited channel and scroll down. Under the different playlists that we have, there's a whole course on statistics. You can go watch the course on statistics, learn the most common issues that statistics have, and how you go about preventing them. I know you have to learn, right? But it's free. Could be worse. I could be sending you to a paid class. That one's totally free. Thomas Horner says, in your experience, is using always-on availability groups, does it require more database administration and monitoring and maintenance, i.e. babysitting? Yes. It's so much more complex with so many more moving parts. There are so many more things that can fail, and you're really putting all your eggs in one basket in the form of the Windows cluster. When that Windows cluster goes down, you are in trouble. So like all of the replicas are unavailable, and you have to fix the clustering before you can even get anything else back up and running online. So yes, absolutely, it's much more complex. Rick says, how should we capture a baseline or a series of captures with the Blitz scripts that you wish would have been collected to help understand performance problems when the server is under stress at a later time? Or to paraphrase Rick's question, how do I collect metrics during the good times that will help me during the bad times? So what you can do is you can run SPBlitz first. It has a parameter for output database name, output schema name, output table name. And if you read the directions for SPBlitz first, it tells you how to use those and capture every 15 minutes to a table. That way you can go back through the history during the bad times and start to understand what was good and what's different. But here's the thing. There are a couple of problems with this. One, an avalanche of data doesn't usually help you all that much when times are bad. When times are bad, what I find with a lot of database administrators is that they're already, nothing against them, I mean, this just is what it is. I was in the same bucket. That more data wasn't necessarily helpful. What I needed was a way to cut through the noise and get just to the signal. Like, how could I quickly get to root cause analysis? And the more data that you have, the harder it is to get to the signal if you're not used to using that data for troubleshooting. When clients come to me for performance tuning, sometimes they'll go, here, we've got all this data. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, hold on. We're just going to go look at the production server, and I'm going to see what's going on right now. Because even if I know what's different in terms of the performance metrics, I don't necessarily know what changed. Oh, believe me, nothing changed. We didn't change anything. Nobody touched it. Yeah, no, I don't buy any of that. You might be gathering metrics from a different version of the app code, before somebody changed the indexes, before a SQL Server update. So for me, I don't want an overwhelming amount of background information. I usually just look at what's going on with the SQL Server right now and go, I understand that 3 months ago you were happy and healthy. You're unhealthy now. Let me show you what's unhealthy so that we can get past and start fixing that. Oh, I was like, I hear something really loud, but it's like on the next Peninsula over. There's some kind of loudspeaker thing happening. I don't know what's going on there. All right, next up, let's see here. Willem says, do you know of any success stories of companies that have made the move to Azure with a large SQL Server estate, like 80 enterprise servers and up? We're trying to figure out how to attempt this, but there seems to be so many pitfalls to be made aware of. Oh, sure, I've had clients go 100% to Amazon, 100% to Azure, 100% to Google Compute Engine. And I don't want you to think that hiring me was a key to that. That's not the case. I'm just saying I know of a lot of customers who've gone through and done that. I don't know any customers where it was easy. I don't know of any customers where it was fast. I don't know of any customers where it was cheap. It was genuinely hard work, in the sense that if you're old like me, when we moved from physical servers to VMs, it was also a lot of hard work. It was also a lot of planning, a lot of preparation. But by the time we got to the promised land with virtual machines, then we ended up saving money because we could pack more clowns into the car. The cloud's kind of the same way. You can save money in the really long term, but in the short term, in the first 1 to 3 years, it's a much higher expense as you go through those migration processes. One of my clients, huge thousands of SQL servers, said, all right, we're going 100% to the cloud, period. That's all there is. And they went from 3 DBAs to 12 DBAs in a 1-year time span in order to accomplish that project. So it was, you talk about not trivial work at all. Stockburn says, hi Brent, any advice on deadlocks where the two processes are an update and a delete? They both hit the clustered primary key, and then as you put it, one of them gets a bullet from the deadlock monitor. Thanks for these office hours. You're welcome. Generally, when that kind of thing happens, it's because of either you have too many indexes and the two update and delete are colliding on the non-clustered indexes, because not only do they have to keep the clustered index in sync, they also have to affect all the non-clustered indexes. I've seen situations where people have a handful or a dozen non-clustered indexes, and you end up getting blocking in over on those, and one will grab an index before the other and end up in a deadlocking situation. The time when I've seen it is when SQL Server can't figure out how many rows will be affected by the update or delete, and they both try to escalate to table level locks when those estimates were incorrect. So have as few indexes as possible in order to support your workloads, and make it as easy as possible for SQL Server to understand how many rows you're going to be updating and deleting in those individual statements. Next up, catmanjan says, applications now have tech like Kubernetes and are more or less hands-off. Excuse me, I'm sorry, that was not fair. And come on now. What are you just like reading brochures? Have you actually tried to manage Kubernetes? Why don't database engines do this too? How many millions of hours have been wasted on? Okay, so I have a feeling that you're just hearing the Kool-Aid of what some of those technologies are. The other thing with that is legit with applications using Kubernetes is most applications are stateless. They don't need to maintain a single source of the truth across multiple servers, or the single source of truth that they're managing is in the database. It's not in the application tier. So you can lose application servers left and right, and it doesn't really matter. You can create new application servers left and right, and it doesn't really matter. They don't have some one piece of truth that they're all trying to maintain. So that's really the challenge with relational databases, is you have to deal with locking and ACID properties to make sure that when you update someone's customer balance, that it makes it to disk. NoSQL solutions solve this in a different way with things like distributed quorum and consistency handling. You can learn more about that with, if you Google for the CAP theorem, for example, you'll see how other platforms manage those kinds of trade-offs. But SQL Server was never designed to work with multiple masters all agreeing on a quorum. And really, I don't think any relational databases were designed to work that way. Non-relational databases, absolutely. But so if that kind of thing is important to you, if having the ability to put bullets in database servers at any time and keep up and running, check out NoSQL Solutions, because they solve this in really cool ways. I'm still laughing at that. Lazy D asks, hi Brent, in upgrading from SQL Server 2014 and to 2019, what can be done about CLR so that it doesn't break due to the changes in CLR security? I don't do anything with CLR, so unfortunately I don't have the answer to that one. It's just one of those things where I'm like, if you need to do C# code, that's what app servers are for. Go use an app server. Next up, Vegas says, what do you think of RedGate SQL Toolbelt? A friend insists that it's a necessary purchase to help production DBAs manage an environment. I'm fine. There are a ton of great utilities out there. I'm totally fine with relying on third-party tools. I can't in my weirdo job because I have to keep parachuting in from one customer to another, and I can't rely on them having any one specific tool. But if you're working at the same company for years on end, go buy third-party tools. They make your life easier. He says, any other similar tools or utilities that I'm a personal fan of? Things like, source controlled comparison tools, multi-scripting, etc. For me, no, because I tend to not do multi-server management. I just work on one emergency at a time. But I think that if you are a multi-server production DBA, if you're managing a farm of databases, you need, in the year 2021, you need to know PowerShell and you need to know DBA tools. DBAtools.io is a framework that helps you manage more servers with less work. Totally open source, it's free, so I would totally go down that road. Again, I don't use it. I do use PowerShell in a really weird way, but I don't use PowerShell and I don't do multi-server administration, so I can't speak for them personally, but it's obvious in the industry that those are just huge and they've taken over. Null Pointer says, I've been fighting with tuning a query or view. This view joins to another view, which when run by itself is super fast, but when I join it to a larger query, all the estimates are way off. The stats exist on the column. Okay, so and you go on into more details. The thing where it's time for you to go head into is either my fundamentals of query tuning class, which is 1 day, or after that, my mastering query tuning class, which is 3 days long. And I go into that exact problem and what your options are for fixing it. Oh man, I wish I could teach it to you in 30 seconds, but unfortunately that's why it's 4 days of training altogether, because there's a whole lot to cover inside there. Dave says, what would you think about a disaster recovery plan that involves taking differential backups of the production server every 2 hours, asking for a friend? Oh, it's so funny. I've run into that exact situation. So I had normally, if you ask most database administrators, they'd say that's probably not so smart. You should be taking log backups instead. But there are edge case scenarios where that makes sense. And I'll give you an example. One of the shops that I was working in had an application that continuously updated the exact same data over and over. Every second they were executing thousands of updates to exactly the same rows. I'm trying to think of a way I could abstract it. Think of it as like a web page hit counter. You remember those counters that used to increment how many times people have seen the web page? Imagine that it's like that, where the application is continuously saying, update view count, set it to view count +1. So the application's super chatty, writing over and over again. The transaction log would be huge if we tried to back up the transaction log, but the actual data itself was fairly small. So in that case, because the business didn't need point-in-time recovery, because think web page hit counters, you could lose a couple hours worth of data and it wouldn't really bother you that much. In a case like that, we did full backups once a day and then differential backups every so often, so that whenever all hell broke loose, we didn't have to worry about all the changes in the transaction log. We could just apply the diffs, which were extremely small. Where it makes less sense is where the differentials are large, take a long time to run, take a long time to restore, etc. And the log files are small, so just that helps guide you down the path there. Next up, Scott McFadden asks, "Hi Brent, I appreciate your SQL Server book recommendations. They're spot on. Oh, glad you enjoy those. Do you have any book or training recommendations for learning Postgres?" No, except for there's one course that gets rave reviews, A Curious Moon, M-O-O-N, A Curious Moon. If you search for A Curious Moon Postgres, it's a training course that teaches you Postgres using data from NASA, if I remember right. So in terms of querying, that's useful. I don't have any good recommendations around managing it. Because when I went to use Postgres, we used Amazon Aurora, which Amazon manages for you, which is the big reason, of course, that we went for it. This is going to sound funny, but when we designed the databases for SQL Constant Care, our monitoring and trending service, I didn't want to be the database administrator. I don't want to be on call when something breaks. I would much rather pay a cloud vendor to manage that stuff for me. Managing things like SQL Server is a great way to take money off of the table. Like for career type purposes, you can make a lot of money doing that. But it's a really crappy place as a small business to have to worry about managing uptime. So I'm a huge fan of Amazon Aurora. Next up, Champaign DBA says, "Hi Brent, I read your 5-part blog on foreign keys." That's actually Eric Darling, if I remember right, Eric Darling's post. He says, "And you're concerned about locking when using cascade delete. Wouldn't that not be a concern when using read committed snapshot?" No, it would be, because when you do isolation level upgrades due to cascading updates or deletes, they're serializable range locks, as in nobody else can go into ranges of rows, and that's nasty when you need to handle concurrency on a table. So if you're, though you might be only inserting, updating, and deleting a couple of rows, you can end up locking ranges of rows in other tables, thereby stopping concurrency. Next up, Pat says, "Hi Brent, I'm an accidental DBA. My database monitoring software often alerts on OS paging. What's normal to hone in on?" I don't worry about it at all. Not even a little bit. If the OS wants to page something for some reason, that's completely fine. As long as SQL Server is the only application installed on that SQL Server, we're not trying to run other things like integration services, analysis services, reporting services, internet, browsers, whatever. And then also that you set max memory appropriately according to my setup checklist, where I talk about leaving at least 4 gigabytes of RAM free or 10%, whichever is greater, leaving that free for the OS to go do its thing. As long as you do those two things, the OS will still scribble things to disk from time to time, but they won't be significant. It won't be a performance factor. And let's see, next up, 7 says, "How does sampling work for statistics?" Then he goes on in deeper. Rather than try to address it in a short period, I'll just tell you, go to our YouTube channel and then go to our totally free statistics course, and you'll learn way more than you wanted to know. Just absolutely great stuff. SpongeBob SquarePants asks, "Do you have any recommendations for tools specific to ODSs in SQL Server?" No, unfortunately. Again, they can't all be long answers. David says, "Do you have tips on how to deal with people who take other people's advice or tips as their own in the workplace? Here I am with 1.5 years of experience in SQL Server teaching people with 5+ years of experience. But when they tell the boss, they say it was them who came up with the query." That's an interesting question. At the end of the day, you want your coworkers to be successful. And Okay, let me say it this way. Okay, so I'm a trainer, right? Like I teach people all the time, and I teach people for free. I teach you out on YouTube and all that. I know y'all take credit for this stuff. I know you do. I know y'all take credit for my stuff. I have seen community presenters take my material, rip off my exact session titles, rip off my presentations, rip off my content, take exactly what they learned from me and represent it as their own somewhere else. And at the end of the day, you have to go, well, all right, I'm inspiring these people and they're helping to evangelize and teach others. I have to be okay with that, because that means I reached them in a way that they could use. This is going to happen all the time throughout the rest of your career. Let it go. My tip would be to be at peace with that. And there are some communities where people try to hide their knowledge under a bushel. Like they'll be like, I don't want anybody else to see what I know because I want to take credit for all of this. But that's not really an effective way to become known amongst your peers and do well in your career. Embrace it. Be totally okay with that. Because if they're really as dumb as you insinuate, because your question went on to say some of them don't even know how union works. If they're really as dumb as you insinuate, it's not like they're a threat to you anyway. And odds are people in your office know that they don't know what those people are doing. So it's not such a bad thing. Khaled says, I have duplicates on my primary key column. What? Some of my customers on SQL Server 2014 have this weird issue. In order to fix it, I had to drop all the foreign key constraints. Duplicates on a primary key shouldn't be possible. I'm trying to think of situations where it would be. Duplicates of a clustered index would be, but I would want to know more about what the problem was. And don't send it to me as a follow-up, but I just feel like we're probably missing something here. Maybe it was database corruption. It could be something weird like that, but it's not something that you should normally see. The whole point of primary keys is that they eliminate that. SQL Deadwood asks, how do I perform index maintenance on a synchronous AG database with heavy fragmentation without ruining everything? Well, start by Googling for Brent Ozar, why defragmenting your index isn't helping. Brent Ozar, why defragmenting your indexes isn't helping. When you watch that, you may follow the steps that are described in the video about analyzing your top weight stats. And what you might come to a surprising conclusion that it's not really going to make that much of a difference when you do go through and defragment it. But if you do want to defragment it, use Ola Hollengren's maintenance scripts. And Ola Hollengren's maintenance scripts have a parameter for how many seconds you want to delay in between each index. Set that up to 60 seconds or 90 seconds so that your network and your I/O subsystem have time to relax and recover in between each heavy round of operations, and also let end users use the system a little better. Now, this still isn't going to help you on the big old 10, 20, 100 gigabyte tables, but I would argue for those, you probably aren't going to be able to rebuild them without serious performance degradation in a synchronous AG anyway. If you wanted to, you could flip it to async over a weekend if the business was okay with it, and then go and tackle it. That'd be one thing I'd try. And then we'll take one more. SQL Deadwood asks, according to the Trixie documentation hobbit, quote, there are specific but uncommon scenarios when index maintenance may be needed in Azure SQL Database. What are they in English? So for me, it is, I'll give you oh man, this is going to be tough to explain quickly. So there are two kinds of fragmentation, internal fragmentation and external fragmentation. What the documentation is referring to is that external fragmentation is not all that important up in Azure SQL DB, but internal fragmentation is important. So if you go to search for Brent Ozar, why defragmenting your indexes isn't helping, I've got a video explaining the differences between internal and external fragmentation. The kinds of scenarios that produce really heavy internal fragmentation, those are the ones where they're talking about you may need to do index maintenance. All right, well, that is a good run for this morning. We're coming up on about half an hour of questions and answers. I keep putting my hands back in my pockets because it's so windy out here that my little fingers are freezing to death. I wasn't sure whether or not we'd get sun out here. It's a little sunny over on that side, but not too sunny over there. I should pick this up and take you around. So we have, I'll just go walk over for a minute. So I'm going to walk around the lighthouse keeper's house and then show you where downtown Reykjavik is at. So, there we go. So that's the lighthouse keeper's house right there. And then downtown Reykjavik is over that way. There was the episode a little while back where I had an animal running around at my feet, which we later as a group figured out is a mink. That is also over there, kind of at the edge of where those white like tanks are at. So that is it for today's episode of Office Hours. I have a friend of mine, Pete, who just flew into town today, who's from America, who's going to be spending the week with us. So today I got to go lay out exactly what our itinerary is. We have a bunch of, like he said, he's going to leave it up to me to see which sites we go and tour. I have to go and map out some of my favorites from the south and the west of Iceland, the Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon, the Black Sand Beach down at Vik, the Trolls offshore, the Snaefellsnes Peninsula. So I'm going to go write that up and plot out our trip, and I will see you next time. Adios, folks.